The world feels a bit toxic and blah these days, doesn't it? The same old people coming up with the same old solutions for big problems that still don't work. We need to change the game. Well, welcome to Women Advancing. Join me, host Kate Byrne, in this dynamic bi-weekly podcast, bringing together female founders, funders, and thought leaders. Listen to the people driving change, how they got there, how you can help, and yep, how you might just be the next one to advance. Proof that all ships rise with women at the helm. That's what happens when Women Advance with Kate Byrne.
Hey everyone, it's your host Kate Byrne with Women Advancing. What happens when one of the freshest voices in journalism takes the mic? Literally. Well, we're about to find out, because in this episode of Women Advancing, I get to sit down and talk with Sarah Holder. She's the former CityLab standout and current Bloomberg reporter and one of the co-hosts of Bloomberg's The Big Take podcast. We talk about shifting mediums and shaping narratives and showing up with clarity in a crowded and way too often still crusty media landscape. We're going to get into what it's like to cover housing and politics and housing policies and power as a young woman in journalism, how podcasting has changed the way she actually connects with audiences, and why storytelling still has potential to move the needle if we're brave enough to tell the truth and loud enough to be heard. So whether you're in the newsroom or just trying to be heard in the boardroom, in your company hallway, or even in your own home, this is a masterclass in voice, vision, and staying rooted when the ground around you keeps shifting. And we all know there's a lot of that going on. So enjoy, and be sure to stay to the end, because I got a few takeaways to share. Enjoy. Oh my gosh, Women Advancing listeners, you are in for such a treat today. I am joined by Sarah Holder, who's the Bloomberg news reporter and co-host of Bloomberg's Big Take podcast, one of the up-and-coming voices of news media of her generation. Sarah, thank you so much for making the time for us.
It's so fun to be here. I'm so glad to be talking to you and talking to one of my favorite podcast hosts, Kate.
Oh, stop. Like, again. No, seriously, I've known Sarah for a bit. And it's been really fabulous to watch her blossom and grow and do everything that we talk about every week, which is really stepping in and owning her voice and her power. So we're going to do a little dive and kind of see how she did it, but also what she sees out there on the horizon. What's it like being a young women's voice in today's world, which we'll get into in a little bit. But let's dive into that personal journey. So, I mean, seriously, Sarah, think about this. Your CV, you've worked at amazing places, The Atlantic, Bloomberg Business Week. So how did you get to where you are today?
Well, Kate, I've always just wanted to be a journalist. I've always been so curious. I've loved asking people questions. I've loved writing. And in college, that was kind of my whole life. Like, I was editing for the weekly newspaper. I was writing for all the magazines I could. I was freelancing for little environmental magazines in New Haven. And it was just my dream and my passion to pursue a journalism career. So after college, I had a brief internship at Politico, covering the first Trump term. But I started out at Politico in Washington, D.C., but I also had this fellowship at The Atlantic to work at CityLab. And CityLab was kind of like a dream home for me at the beginning of my career, because I was really interested in housing policy, urban policy, how cities work. And CityLab was housed at The Atlantic, and it was doing all of those things and more. So I got to learn a lot from a really small team of really dedicated journalists at CityLab. And that was kind of like my journalistic home for years and years and years, and where I learned everything I know today.
Isn't it funny? It's really, really true. When you go to different houses, as we call them in the media realms, it really does impact, I think, one's lenses, the filter through which we see things. So I know you did some extraordinary work, as you mentioned, at CityLab. So now here you are doing the Big Take. How has your perspective as a younger journalist kind of shaped the stories that you're now, you tell and how they're being received?
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting. At CityLab, our focus was really looking at localities and local stories and understanding their national implications, and looking at cities as kind of laboratories for experimentation, for policymaking, for activism. And now at The Big Take, I'm a host of a daily news podcast that's really global in reach. It it reaches everyone in the Bloomberg News ecosystem. I'm talking to people in China, in Iran, in London, and reaching people in those countries as well. And so the focus is much more global in scope, and then trying to make people in their local cities understand how to make sense of the world and the relevance. And so it's kind of like the opposite. I'm kind of doing the opposite now in my host chair, but it's been really rewarding, especially in such like an insane time for news, to be waking up every day, reading the headlines, and then actually being a part of kind of deciphering them and helping people break them down. And so that's been a really rewarding transition, but it's also been, sometimes it can be intimidating to sort of have to understand the global geopolitical dimensions of a war in the Middle East when, just a couple of years ago, I would probably have been writing about the New York City mayor's race.
Right. When I was at Business Week, I can remember, to me, that was one of the best and most important things about Business Week was it had such a gift. This is also everyone before Bloomberg bought it. So we're talking ancient times. But I really appreciated how it brought the relevance of why. I can remember the then editor-in-chief, Steve Shepard, explaining to me why the fall of the Mexican peso was eventually going to hit me in San Francisco at the time, why it all matters. And I think, has there been anything you've noticed in terms of, as you hear these global stories, and instead of sort of localized smaller cities, now you're working with big ones, are there any commonalities? I mean, is the world smaller than we think or more alike than we think?
I mean, that's a really a beautiful question. I think we are more alike than we think. And I think we're all connected by these sort of global forces in ways that I didn't understand. We did this really fun episode recently for The Big Take with my colleague, producer Julia Press, on the bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich. And so it's a New York City breakfast sandwich staple, and it's getting much more expensive. Like, inflation is impacting the bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich. But it's not just inflation. It's drought in Brazil. It's supply chain disruptions. Yeah, it's right. It's bird flu. It's tariffs. It's tariff policy. It's everything sort of combined in this one sort of like silly sandwich item. And we were able to kind of trace the supply chain of the products that go into a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich from all over the world, and kind of help listeners like understand why something that used to cost you $4 now costs you $6. Like, there's so many global capitalist forces that go into one breakfast item. So I feel like that's kind of what we're trying to do every day on The Big Take is be like, okay, you wake up in the morning, you buy something at your coffee shop, and actually you need to know a lot about like international trade policy to understand the significance of that.
So, you mentioned something really earlier about, you deciphering, right? The different headlines. Do you have any tips and ideas for, I talked with Amy Bernstein over at HBR about this. It's this whole notion of critical thinking, critical thought, to your point, discernment. Are there tips, or do you have suggestions for people to like, oh my gosh, because on the one hand, there are sort of old traditional schools, then there are all sorts of new schools of news sources. What is a listener, watcher, viewer to do?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of news out there, which I think is only a good thing. Like, more voices in the space is better. And we've also seen a lot of publications close down. So I would always be like, more, especially on the local news side. But what I do is I listen to my daily diet of daily news podcasts, The Daily, The Journal, NPR. And I also subscribe to newsletters of writers that I really admire and have followed their work for a long time, because you kind of get the personal touch of being in connection with writers whose work you trust, respect, and whose sort of analysis makes sense. And then, sadly, I have to be on social media a lot for my job, which helps understand like what people are talking about and how they're sort of processing headlines. And just try to read. I also read a lot of local news. Like, when I was living in San Francisco, I was reading the San Francisco Chronicle every day, and some of the newer upstarts like the San Francisco Standard, SF Weekly. When I was in DC, I subscribed to 730 DC, which is like a local newsletter with a very community-minded approach. And now that I'm in New York, there's a huge network of local news startups, along with, the New York Times. There's Hellgate, there's The City. And so I try to keep abreast of what's going on locally there. So kind of pick your buckets: national, local, and then social, community-based news. That helps me.
And then kind of take a peek. So with that all being said, here you are walking into these spaces, holding conversations that are pretty much still dominated kind of like by traditional voices. As you're breaking in and you're, as I mentioned in my intro, blossoming, which you truly are. And it's really fun. And thank you for everything that you're doing.
I
But so
appreciate
how do
that.
you balance like authority and approachability? Because I could see how it could be easy to be underestimated, and they shouldn't, silly fools, while wanting to demonstrate, right, authority,
hmm
but not be too, bossy Bess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting question and it's a hard line to toe. I think what's great about the podcast that I'm on right now is often I have to be a proxy for the listener. And as a journalist, all I do is ask questions. And so if I don't know the answer to something, the useful path forward is to ask it because perhaps someone else listening doesn't know it either.
Right.
But I also have an amazing team of people around me that help me get really, really prepped and really, really read in on issues that I might not know much about last week. But now, like, I could tell you where the price of Brent crude oil is this week, the latest in ceasefire negotiations in Iran and the Middle East. And bringing that authority and that level of research to the conversations allows me to ask both sort of curious, open, and well-researched and knowledgeable questions. So I think it's actually very useful in the job of a podcast host to have a little bit of more naivete and an openness to learning and being told I'm wrong while still just like doing so much research and making
Right.
sure I get nothing wrong.
Crossing T's and
Yeah,
dotting I's.
yeah, exactly. That bringing that like journalistic rigor, ethics, and like attention to detail before the conversations and after the conversations, so that people can't say I can't do this as well as anyone else.
So when, I know that you started off in print and then shifted over to podcasting and digital in general. So question for you, is there any kind of difference in the connection when you're, you know what I mean, by voice and this sort of interaction versus, great, I'm writing it, done, did my deadline, okay, onward I go.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious for you to answer this as well for yourself, but I think one of the reasons I wanted to move into the audio space is in part because I was having all these really wonderful conversations with my sources and hearing their stories in their own words and then paraphrasing it, quoting them in my pieces and adding my own context. But I really thought there's so much value in just hearing a person tell their own story in their own words. And it was really exciting to me to have the opportunity to do that. So the connection with sources, I think, is one part of it. And then there's the connection with listeners. Like I definitely think there are different audiences and different listeners who are able and ready and excited to listen to a 15-minute podcast episode about a really in-depth topic versus reading a 3,000 word piece that I worked on for 6 months. Some people just aren't gonna. Sometimes you're just not going to reach people in
Right.
the written medium, and so that was also very exciting to me to have the opportunity to reach new people in new ways.
The reason why I love podcasting conversations is I'm just one curious about people in general too, though I think there goes back to the earlier question I mentioned. Everyone has got similar stories. I just, there's so many really watching my girls as they're getting out of college and then sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to get the perfect job. And if I don't get it right out the gate, there goes my life and my career. And I'm so unlucky because I don't know exactly what I want to do. And the truth of the matter is, extraordinary people had no freaking clue.
Totally.
And just how much and how often people sort of, I don't want to say luck into, but fall into, sideways into jobs and careers that kind of take them in different ways. And so just to sort of let everybody know, hey, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And
Totally.
you're going to figure it out because what you're going to do doesn't even exist right now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, something I did before like applying to this job actually, maybe a tangent, but just
Yeah.
on the topic of finding your way, I was really confused where I wanted to go in journalism. I had been, working at CityLab for 5, 6 years, like loved it, loved my editors, like felt so fulfilled, but was really interested in just like a new challenge. So I went to this person called a decision coach,
Ooh.
and I just talked to her about career aspirations and opportunities. And what she really encouraged me to do is just like write a list of values and sort of adjectives you would want in your next job. And that was really, really helpful. It wasn't like, oh, I need to get the best new job, or it wasn't about where I would work or what actual job I would do. It was more about how the work would make me feel, what kind of people I would want to work with, and what kind of output I would want to put into the world. And that was a really helpful framework for thinking about like what should come next for me.
That is fantastic. And as you've kind of gotten more and more comfortable and sort of, increased your span of influence, I shall say, have you noticed, or was there one particular moment when you actually, because of your reporting, there was a change sparked or there was a shift in the conversation? I can imagine, well, actually for either one, but especially maybe CityLab's days, but even maybe now. And so what was that and what did it feel like? Speaking of feelings.
Yeah. Well, one of the stories I did a couple years ago that I spent a really long time on and felt really strongly about was the story about homeowners associations in Colorado and their power to foreclose upon residents over unpaid fines and fees. And I spoke to this one family who was basically being evicted from their home that they'd lived in for many years by their homeowners association. And I learned a lot about the powers that homeowners associations have in the United States and did a lot of research on their history and really got to know this family in Colorado. And after my piece was published, about a year later, I don't know that my piece specifically had anything to do with this, but they were told by a judge that they could stay in their home, that their fight was over. And
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really heartening just to have followed their journey for so long, known how hard they were fighting, and to see it through to the end. And the fact that their lawyer reached out and sent me the update on the case was really useful. I'll also say another piece I wrote with a colleague or a couple of colleagues at Bloomberg about the NYPD's police chase policy and how they were engaging in sometimes very dangerous pursuits of suspects with cars, and they were often leading to bad outcomes, leading to people, civilians, pedestrians, and people they were pursuing getting hurt. There was a lot of local coverage of this issue at the time, and then the NYPD changed their pursuit policy to be a little bit more in line with best practices. And again, something like that, it's really hard to prove like one-to-one influence, but a lot of the best practices that we talked to experts about were then adopted by the NYPD. So
that's huge. Congratulations. Regardless of whichever, but that's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and I wrote that with my colleague Fola Akinabi and Kendall Taggart. Just want to give them a shout out.
Thank you. Absolutely. So what's a narrative about young people or young cities, like up and coming cities, that you're so tired of hearing, and what's a more accurate story underneath it?
I don't know if this is still the narrative, but thinking about apathy among younger generations. I think we've seen in protest movements over the past few years with the New York City mayoral election that a lot of young people are getting excited about. Like, we're not apathetic at all. Young people are so excited and engaged in politics. And I think young people are also pretty disillusioned with the leadership, perhaps rightly, in a lot of situations. I think, especially in my work at CityLab, I talk to a lot of activists and advocates who are out every day, either in the streets or in service positions, working with tenants who have been evicted from their homes or working with folks who are on food stamps. And like a lot of the people who are actually doing the work on the ground to support community members are young people. I think of my friends who are, government researchers, who are public health experts, who are, training to be lawyers. I just see a lot of energy and optimism and on the ground grit from our generation that is very exciting to me.
It's exciting to me too. We are counting on you. Please, please, please. So building kind of on that and this notion of kind of giving, voice, mic, platform to the people within a community. What's kind of your take on the future of local journalism and civic storytelling? Who's kind of, is someone doing it? I mean, obviously, of course you all are, but aside from you all, are there models that kind of give you hope that you think are like nailing it or really interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned some of the local news sources that I really relied on
Yes.
in each city that I lived in. I think New York has a really interesting local news ecosystem where there's some sort of worker-owned collectives like Hellgate, New York. There's, nonprofit reader-supported journalism like The City that does great investigations. And then things like 730 DC in Washington, DC, which is like a newsletter that tells you the news of the day. It sprinkles in some events. It gets people off their computers and in community with each other. It like kind of builds a
Right.
reader ecosystem around the product. I think all of those are really exciting. The Baltimore Banner, another sort of nonprofit news model that erupted in Baltimore. I read a lot of this news a lot, and
Yeah.
I am really excited by the potential model that it represents.
And I think that's something to take note of. I know there were, because I had spent a little bit of time over at the San Francisco Chronicle and
Hmm.
Gate when I was there, living in the Bay. And the truth is, I think so many folks have, it is sad when local newspapers, no longer cease to exist. However,
Yeah,
don't give up hope because there is such a great upcropping
yeah.
of next generation and just different outlets. It's all still there. It just won't look as standardized as we had become accustomed to.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, another thing for the younger generation, I'm seeing a lot of, friends and colleagues start their own things. I'm sure like so many people on your show have talked about Substack and newsletters,
Yes.
but, my partner has a Substack and it's just like been such an amazing way for him to connect with readers. There's like a vibrant comment section. Like he's able to, reach people or like send people stories that otherwise would be behind a paywall and kind of get the pulse of what people are talking about. And there's clearly like such a vibrant community of people who are obsessed with really somewhat niche topics on Substack. And I think that that's really
Yes.
exciting. And I think people are really craving that. And there are ways to get paid for that work too. So,
Right. Well, the thing that I think about that too is I can, when everything shifted from print over to the, websites, everyone thought, oh, great. Now there's going to be the ivory towers, the editor in chief of Days Gone By up in the ivory tower. Now you'll be communicating back and forth all the time. And I think that happens less with a lot of,
mhm.
it's just become the next generation of an ivory tower, but this one's a little bit, this one's digital. And
Yeah.
so now kind of looking at what can happen next. I mean, and what takes place next, which I think is cool. So speaking of what happens next, more women, it seems to
Mm.
me, are really kind of stepping up and taking the helms of major news and media houses. Also, let's face it, there, even on TV, there's a lot of, there's just a lot of interesting young voices taking over for CNN and for the broadcast and
Hmm.
all that. Will there be an impact on the stories being told, do you think, or the angle through which they're told?
I'm so lucky to have always had women editors. And I love my male editors as well, but a
Great
lot of
too.
my, bosses over the years have been women. And I think that's been it's been really wonderful to get to work with women and be supported by women mentors throughout my career. And so I think I've been a benefactor of having women in the media, which I really appreciate. And I see that at Bloomberg. There's a lot of women that are elevated into positions of leadership and power. I don't know like how different the coverage really is, but I think just in general, a diversity of voices is really, really important.
Always.
Age, race, and gender, economic diversity, et cetera, I think always brings a richer pool of stories to the table. It's not just how stories are told, it's what stories are told. And I know a lot of your guests have spoken about that too, but I think that's really the most important thing is who is pitching the stories and who is thinking about the kinds of sources we're calling up, even more than, how those stories are written. And it's something I think about on the podcast as well, having, gender diversity, geographic diversity in the voices that are speaking on these topics.
One question I'm thinking about is I've just finished spending a ton of time talking about AI bots, and
Mm,
I volunteer and I teach intentional leadership at a small 2-week boot camp.
hmm
We're teaching AI to high school kids.
hmm
And one thing I posed to them was, one of the things one day is you're going to have to lead. Sure, you'll have an intergenerational team, but you're also going to have, what are you going to do when you have bots?
mm.
You're going to not only have Right, which is a weird thought.
Yeah.
But it also makes me wonder because I know that's one of the things people are so afraid of, AI interspersing itself within like what's real, what's fake in content and news. We can all tell when you're on YouTube and which pieces are actual,
Yeah, totally.
right? And it just makes me wonder what's going to happen later on. Like one day, will there ever be a bot who becomes the editor in chief? I
Well,
think perhaps no.
I think some newsrooms are experimenting a lot with AI. I know
Sure.
Bloomberg is like I kind of haven't really been a little wary to touch it. But we have like AI summaries of a lot of
Right.
articles
Research
now. Yeah,
should.
research and yeah, I know, we're being encouraged to use it responsibly and carefully. Again, I'm kind of like, maybe later. I think it is, it's something that newsrooms are experimenting with for better or for worse. I think there's also a lot of mistakes that
Of
are
course.
made and hallucinations. And I feel like with trust in news already so low in some areas, like you don't want to mess it up with a robot
Right.
making a mistake. But if it makes things faster and clearer, I'm open to it.
Right. Okay. Interesting. That's fun. All right. Well, so now in closing, and I always close with this, but it'll be particularly interesting to hear your answer to this question. So, knowing what your wizened self knows now, what advice would you give your younger self, knowing what you know now?
I think it is the advice I'd give myself is don't be so hard on yourself. You're doing something important. People are listening to you, people are reading you. So hold that responsibility carefully. I think like looking back, I didn't realize, I was 22 years old writing articles for The Atlantic and for CityLab and for Politico magazine. And that's like a huge responsibility and it's a huge privilege. And I realized how little I knew then when I was writing those
Isn't it
articles.
funny the responsibility that we're given?
Yeah, yeah. And I think, yeah, just what I did back then and what I still do now is just talk to a lot of people, hear a lot of different perspectives, be ready to change your mind and evolve and grow as a journalist. And I think in hindsight, I just realized how lucky I've been to have the career in journalism that I've had and just hold on to every day. And um,
What advice would you
yeah.
give to folks who are trying to get into it? Are there any secret agent ways? Haha.
I just wrote so much. Like I was looking back at some of the stuff that I wrote in college. I was just like volunteering for random nonprofits to write articles about their events. I was writing 4,000 word articles in a night for our weekly paper. Just like try to get as many bylines as you can and try to find a focus. I think I really benefited from, just really diving in on housing policy and urban
You did.
policy.
And that wasn't that nuanced niche. I mean, that was really
Yeah.
very smart and so incredibly relevant and gotten grown in its relevance.
Yeah, yeah. And like I was at Politico, during that first Trump era, and it was really an exciting time to be there. I learned so much from the people around me. Like I was writing about issues of national import, but I think it was really useful to pivot to the
Hmm.
local issues to really just understand topics very in a deeper way and build a network of sources that I still talk to today. Like some of the researchers I was talking to in 2018 about Amazon's search for a second headquarters, which sounds like such a like dinky story now, but it was a huge story at the time, and I was one of the experts on it because no one else like wanted to cover it.
Because they thought it was so dinky.
Yeah, and obviously other people were covering it too, but it's stuff like that that I think was offered the biggest learning opportunities to really go deep on subjects that the rest of the news media wasn't always paying attention to and I think that allowed me again to build sources, build an audience and an expertise that has served me well.
Well, absolutely. And the truth is, let's face it, it's going to be something that's always going to be relevant in such a broad swath and large, huge audience. Different assets and different facets of it, of course, but still, nonetheless, there's always going to be relevance. I think that's really sage advice because it's always that way. Two things. One, I can remember it's so often, just like in investing, some of the least sexy items. Like I
Mm-hmm.
remember the story when jeans were being built into the little, divots, the little metal. Oh my gosh, the guy who made those, whew,
Yeah.
go Ray me. For
Yeah.
sure. For
Yeah.
sure.
And it's so funny because I think now that I'm covering news at such a national scale, I realize maybe how niche some of my other interests were. But I'm like, housing policy is the most important thing in the world. Like it underpins everything. And that
Thing.
I still believe to be true, even though I realize like not everyone is going to be obsessively reading about, right to counsel passages at the local level. But to me, that's still one of the most important things in this world. And I'm lucky that I can understand why. And I think every journalist has that passion. And if you find that passion, that can really help propel you on any beat, no matter how small or how big.
Absolutely. It is. It's literally the through line. And it reminds me of, the famous Steve Jobs. His ace in the hole was that random calligraphy class that he took in
I don't
college.
know that story.
Yeah. So what happened was he was going to, I think it was Reed up in Portland. And he went and he took just on a lark because he really liked design and sorts of things. And so we took a calligraphy class and he took it and he loved it, perfected it, and then dropped out and then went on to start building at the Mac. And the piece de la resistance, as he says, his most significant dot that he collected was that calligraphy because it gave him an affinity and an understanding of the importance of font and beauty, especially when you're looking at a screen
Absolutely.
and how
Yeah.
that can really, shift your expression. Some people will look at what gives it a vibe of, jovialness versus somberness for just the whole thing and how that variety of font was what really made Apple stand out. That plus the intuitiveness, of course, but in early days, because it was a place that had a personality. It
Right.
was a screen, but you could kind of customize it and kind of make it your own.
Yeah.
Hence, you felt this group, whoever's making this, they get
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have to bring your special sauce to everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I feel
Exactly.
that now, again, covering global conflicts, covering Trump's remarks, covering the economy. A lot of newsrooms are chasing this exact same story at the same time. And every day on our show, we have to figure out a way to reach our specific audience, our specific listeners, bring like a little pizzazz to make people come back and be like, okay, there's a strong point of view and a strong takeaway that we can have.
Have you ever been afraid of making too strong a point of view?
I
Can you
mean,
ever make too strong a point of view? Can one?
luckily on our show, I often ask for the point of view of our
Ah,
expert reporters
smart lady.
and journalists around the world. Like, obviously, as journalists, you bring a point of view to the work. But what I really like about journalism is being able to translate, amplify, and add context to the point of view that people who've spent, again, like years and decades covering the Strait of Hormuz to listeners.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, listen, Sarah Holder, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time and your many pearls. I want everybody to listen to her on Big Take. That's Bloomberg News. And look for her byline. You will not be sorry at all. But Sarah, thank you so much. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
This was such a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you having the space for so many inspiring guests, and I'm just honored to be a part of it.
Yeah, big part of it. All right. Until
Thank
next
you.
time.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Hey, everyone. Isn't she terrific? It is so wonderful to witness someone's becoming and taking space. Such a fabulous inspiration for all of us, regardless of age, gender, all sorts of things. Just go for it. If you've got a dream and a passion, bring it to life. But my KB takeaways are honestly, it's not so much how the story is being told, but it's what stories are being told and by whom. So make sure that's just such a fabulous way for us to get sort of different bits and pieces. And that's why local, there's always going to be importance and relevance to local. And local is often just a small little snapshot of what's really going on a larger scale. So don't discount local stories because another takeaway, sometimes dinky isn't. Like for Sarah to have gone on and taken up the housing notion of housing policy when she was working at CityLabs, seemingly dry. And that's the thing. Oftentimes B2B stories are the most powerful. And now, guess what? she's a huge asset and she is a real expert in the space, which is definitely going to be a significant dot on her little map. And I would also say that the thing that local allows you is to go deep, not just surface. I'm going to say the same is true of coworkers around you. It's a little bit of a metaphor, kind of a janky one, I know, but just go with me. And how those around you are often just as informed and can give you much more insight than some of the bigger names cast afar. So I'm just really excited to watch and see what her next step is, what her impact is, and where else she's going to be able to tell us stories. So be sure to listen to her on Bloomberg's Big Take. And with that, I'll say take care until the next Women Advancing conversation.
Thanks for listening. May this episode inspire you to move forward. Be sure to go to iTunes, Spotify, katebyrne.co, that's KATEBYRNE.co, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and listen to even more episodes. Here's to strong women. May we know them, may we be them, may we raise them. And be sure to meet them on the next Women Advancing. Ta till next time.